My name's Laura, and a year ago, I thought I had it all figured out. I'd just gotten married to the man of my dreams, and life seemed perfect. I worked as an accountant, mostly from home. But I had a few tricks up my sleeve that would come in handy later, but we'll get to that. My husband, Jack, ran his own business, producing agricultural machinery. We spent most of our free time together, and Jack always insisted on dragging me along to these parties with his friends, colleagues, and business partners. It was a tight-knit group he'd been part of long before I came into the picture. One day we arrived at the party, held at some swanky downtown loft. As we made our way through the crowd, I noticed a few unfamiliar faces. One, in particular, caught my eye, a tall, leggy blonde who looked like she'd just stepped off a runway. Throughout the night, I kept catching glimpses of her. She seemed to be everywhere, always at the center of attention, laughing too loudly at jokes and touching people's arms as she spoke. It wasn't until later, when I was coming back from the bathroom, that I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. "Can you believe Jack brought her here?" A woman's voice, dripping with disdain. "I know, right? What was he thinking, dumping Veronica for that?" Another voice chimed in. I froze, my hand on the door handle. They were talking about me. "She's so boring. I mean, an accountant? Please." Veronica's way more his speed. "Did you see that dress she's wearing? To die for." As I made my way back to Jack, my mind was reeling. Veronica was his ex-girlfriend? The one he'd broken up with to be with me? And now she was here, looking like $1,000,000, while I felt like a frumpy housewife in comparison. I found Jack chatting with a group of men, Veronica hanging on his every word. When he saw me, he smiled and pulled me close. "There you are, babe." I was starting to worry. I forced a smile. "Just freshening up. You know how it is." Veronica's eyes raked over me, a smirk playing on her perfectly painted lips. "Laura, darling, I've been dying to meet you properly. Jack's told us so much about you." Her voice was syrupy sweet, but I could hear the venom underneath. This wasn't going to end well, I could feel it in my bones. The weeks following that party were a blur of social events and mounting tension. Veronica seemed to be everywhere we went, always perfectly coiffed and dressed to kill. She had a knack for making me feel like I didn't belong, and it was starting to get to me. One evening, as I was scrolling through my phone, I came across a post that made my stomach drop. Veronica had shared 2 photos side by side, one of me from our last gathering, caught at an unflattering angle, and another of herself, looking like she'd just stepped off a magazine cover. The caption read, "Who do you think is a better match for our dear Jack? Vote now." I felt sick. The comments were flooding in, most of them praising Veronica's beauty and questioning Jack's decision to marry me. I couldn't bear to read anymore. "Jack," I called out, my voice shaking. "Can you come here for a second?" He wandered into the room, looking concerned. I shoved the phone in his face, showing him the post. "Your ex is trying to humiliate me publicly. Can't you do something about it? Can't you just, I don't know, ban her or something?" He looked at me, his expression pained. "It's not that simple, Laura. She's the daughter of one of my most important business partners. I can't just tell her not to come." "So what, I'm just supposed to put up with this?" I could feel tears of frustration welling up in my eyes. Jack pulled me into a hug. "No, of course not. Look, I'll talk to her, make it clear that this behavior isn't acceptable. I promise, it'll get better." The next party we attended was at a swanky downtown hotel. I'd spent hours getting ready, determined to hold my own against Veronica. But the moment we walked in, I knew it was a lost cause. She was there, of course, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Throughout the night, I watched as Veronica flitted around Jack like a moth to a flame. She'd brush his arm as she laughed at his jokes, lean in close to whisper in his ear, even try to pull him onto the dance floor. "Come on, Jack," she purred, tugging at his hand. "For old time's sake?" To his credit, Jack politely declined each time. Sorry, Veronica. I'm here with my wife." But even as he said it, I could see the curious glances from the other guests, the whispers behind raised hands. I felt like I was under a microscope, every move scrutinized and found wanting. Later that night, as Jack and I were getting ready for bed, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "I don't want to go to these parties anymore," I blurted out. "I don't belong there, Jack. Everyone knows it. I'm not cut out for this world." The next few events, I made excuses not to go. Work deadlines, headaches, anything to avoid facing that crowd again. Jack went alone, always coming home with stories about how much everyone had missed me. But then, one night, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Tom, one of Jack's friends. There was a photo attached. With shaking hands, I opened it. And there, clear as day, was a picture of Jack with his arms around Veronica's waist, both of them laughing at something off camera. When Jack got home that night, I was waiting for him, the photo pulled up on my phone. "Care to explain this?" I asked, my voice eerily calm. Jack's face fell as he saw the picture. "Laura, it's not what it looks like. I swear." But as he launched into an explanation about Veronica pretending to fall and him catching her, I couldn't help but wonder, was this the beginning of the end? Or was there more to this story than met the eye? After that night, Jack and I had a long, honest talk about the situation. We agreed that it would be best to avoid these parties as much as possible. For a while, things seemed to improve. We spent more time at home, just the two of us, reconnecting and remembering why we fell in love in the first place. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. One evening, as we were having dinner, Jack's phone buzzed with a message. He read it and let out a small sigh. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep the anxiety out of my voice. "It's Mike," he replied, referring to his best friend. "It's his birthday next week. He's throwing a big party and, well, he's really hoping we'll both be there." I wanted to say no, to stick to our agreement, but I could see how important this was to Jack. Against my better judgment, I agreed. "All right," I said, forcing a smile. "For Mike." The night of the party arrived all too soon. I spent hours getting ready, trying to boost my confidence with the perfect outfit and makeup. At first, things seemed to be going okay. Mike greeted us warmly, though I couldn't help but notice how some of the other guests barely acknowledged my presence. But then, just as I was starting to relax, she walked in. Veronica made her entrance like a movie star arriving at a premiere. Her dress was short, tight, and left little to the imagination. The room seemed to hush for a moment as all eyes turned to her. I felt myself shrink, suddenly aware of my own conservative outfit. Jack must have sensed my discomfort because he put his arm around me protectively. Veronica's eyes locked onto us, and a predatory smile spread across her face as she sauntered over. Well, she purred. "Look who finally decided to grace us with her presence. Laura, darling, it's been ages." Before I could respond, she turned her attention to my outfit, her eyes raking over me critically. "Oh honey," she said with mock sympathy, loud enough for others to hear. "You really should let me give you some fashion tips. You dress like my grandmother." The room erupted in poorly concealed snickers. I felt my face burn with humiliation. I opened my mouth to retort, but no words came out. Suddenly, I felt Jack's arm tighten around me. His voice, when he spoke, was cold and hard. "That's enough," he said loudly, cutting through the laughter. "We're leaving. Now." Mike, realizing the situation had gotten out of hand, rushed over. "Jack, Laura, wait. I'm so sorry. This isn't..." But Jack was already steering me towards the door. "Save it, Mike. I thought you were better than this." I guess I was wrong. As we walked out, I could hear the murmurs and whispers behind us, but Jack didn't slow down. He helped me into the car and we drove home in tense silence. Once we were home, Jack pulled out his phone and began furiously typing. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice small. Sending a message to all of them, he replied, his jaw clenched. Making it clear that disrespecting you means disrespecting me. If they can't treat you with respect, they're not our friends. I felt a wave of love and gratitude wash over me. Despite everything, Jack was choosing me. He was standing up for me. It had been a few weeks since the disastrous birthday party, and things had finally started to settle into a new normal. Jack and I were enjoying our quieter life, free from the drama of his old social circle. So when he told me he had to go on a business trip, I wasn't too worried about being left alone. The day after Jack left, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen, not recognizing the number. Curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. "Laura, darling." The sickeningly sweet voice on the other end made my stomach churn. "Veronica." "What do you want?" I asked, not bothering to hide my annoyance. "Oh, don't be like that," she cooed. "I'm calling to extend an olive branch. I'm organizing a little get-together, just 7 of us. I'd love for you and Jack to join us." I scoffed. "Jack's out of town on business. And even if he wasn't, we're not interested in." "Come now, Laura," Veronica interrupted. "It's time to let bygones be bygones. Why don't you come alone? It'll be a perfect opportunity for you to make some friends without hiding behind Jack." Before I could respond, my phone started buzzing with incoming messages. I pulled it away from my ear to see a flood of texts from Jack's old friends, all echoing Veronica's invitation. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to tell them all to go to hell, but another part, well, maybe this was a chance to prove I could hold my own. "Fine," I said finally. "Where and when?" "Wonderful," Veronica exclaimed. "We'll be at the Angels Shelter tomorrow at 8 p.m. You know the place, right?" I couldn't help but smile at the mention of the restaurant. "Yes, I know it." "Perfect. See you then, darling." As I hung up, I felt a mix of emotions. Anxiety, sure, but also a strange sense of anticipation. Angel Shelter, if only they knew. The next evening, I stood outside the Angel Shelter, taking a deep breath before walking in. I spotted the group easily, 7 people at a round table, laughing and chatting. As I approached, the laughter died down. I glanced around the table. There were no empty seats. Veronica stood up, making a show of smoothing down her designer dress. "As you can see, we're all full up here. There's no room for extras." The others at the table snickered, and I felt my face grow hot with humiliation. "You know," Veronica continued, her voice carrying across the restaurant, "a place like this is really only for certain people, beautiful people." She gestured to herself and then looked me up and down with disdain. "You might be more comfortable at, oh, I don't know, some cheap diner eating a greasy burger?" The table erupted in laughter. I saw one of the guys, I think his name was Brad, pull out his phone and start recording. The tension in the air was palpable as everyone waited to see how I would react. Veronica's smug smile, the barely contained laughter of the others, they were all expecting me to break down, to run away in tears. But I had a surprise in store for them. Instead of crying, I let out a genuine laugh. "Is something funny, Laura?" Veronica asked, her voice laced with irritation. I smiled, my confidence growing. "Actually, yes. This whole situation is quite amusing." I turned and caught the eye of a man standing near the bar. "Pierre, would you mind coming over here for a moment?" Pierre, the restaurant's manager, hurried over. "Of course, Madame Anders. Is there a problem?" Veronica and her friends watched this exchange with growing bewilderment. "Not at all, Pierre," I said sweetly. "I was just wondering if you might be able to find me a comfortable chair. It seems my friends here have forgotten to save me a seat." "Right away, madam," Pierre replied, snapping his fingers at a nearby waiter who quickly brought over a plush chair. Veronica's face contorted with rage. "Excuse me," she spat, "but I booked this table. We don't want her here." Pierre looked at her, then at me, his expression neutral, but his eyes twinkling with amusement. I'm afraid, mademoiselle, that as the owner of the Angels' Shelter, Madame Anders has the right to sit at any table she chooses. The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost hear the gears turning in their heads as they processed this information. Finally, one of Jack's old college buddies spoke up. "Wait, owner? But you're an accountant." That's what Jack told us. I shrugged, settling into my new seat. I am an accountant. For this restaurant. And a few others that I own. I looked around the table, meeting each of their shocked gazes. I've never been one to flaunt my wealth. I prefer to judge people based on their character, not their bank account or social status. Veronica's face had turned an impressive shade of red. She opened and closed her mouth several times, but no words came out. The others, seemingly forgetting their earlier cruelty, began falling over themselves to make amends. "Laura, we had no idea. Can we get you anything? Please, join us." I held up a hand, silencing them. "Thank you, but that won't be necessary. I think I've seen quite enough this evening." I stood up, smoothing down my dress. "Pierre, please make sure our guests are well taken care of. After all, they are friends of my husband." With that, I walked away, head held high. As I reached the door, I could hear the murmur of conversation resuming behind me, no doubt dissecting what had just happened. When Jack returned from his business trip, I couldn't wait to tell him about the incident at the Angels' Shelter. As we sat in our living room, cups of coffee in hand, I recounted the entire evening, from Veronica's cruel setup to the shocked faces of his former friends when they learned who I really was. Jack's expression shifted from anger to pride as I told my story. When I finished, he burst out laughing. "Oh man, I wish I could have seen their faces." Veronica must have been furious. I grinned, feeling a warmth spread through me at his reaction. "You should have seen her, Jack." I thought she was going to explode. We spent the next hour dissecting the evening, laughing at the absurdity of it all. As our laughter died down, Jack's face grew serious. "Laura, I'm so sorry you had to go through that," he said, taking my hand. "I can't believe they would stoop so low. We don't need people like that in our lives. From now on, it's just us against the world, okay?" I smiled, feeling closer to Jack than I had in months. "Okay." The weeks that followed were peaceful. Jack and I focused on our work and each other, leaving the drama of his old social circle behind. It felt like we were finally on the same page, partners in every sense of the word. Then, one sunny afternoon, I received an unexpected piece of mail. As I opened the elegant envelope, my eyes widened in surprise. It was an invitation to the city's annual Entrepreneur of the Year Awards ceremony. Even more shocking, I was nominated in this successful debut category. The night of the ceremony arrived, and I felt a mix of excitement and nerves as Jack and I entered the grand ballroom. The room was filled with the city's elite, successful business owners, investors, and socialites all mingling and chatting. After a while, Jack spotted some colleagues he wanted to catch up with. "Will you be okay if I go say hello?" he asked, always considerate of my comfort in these situations. I nodded, feeling confident. "Of course. Go ahead, I'll be fine." As Jack made his way across the room, I took a moment to admire the elegant decorations and sip my champagne. I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice someone approaching until I heard a familiar, venomous voice. Well, look what the cat dragged in." I turned to find Veronica standing there, her eyes blazing with barely contained fury. She looked impeccable as always in a designer gown, but her beauty was marred by the ugly sneer on her face. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, grabbing my arm. "This event is for the truly successful people of this city. People like me and my father." I tried to pull away, but her grip tightened. "You don't belong here, you rootless upstart. How dare you show your face among your betters?" As Veronica continued her tirade, I scanned the room, my eyes landing on two distinguished-looking older gentlemen in impeccable suits. A small smile played on my lips as I recognized them. Without a word to Veronica, I raised my hand and waved to the men. They noticed me immediately, their faces lighting up with warm smiles as they began to make their way towards us. The first man reached me, and I immediately wrapped him in a tight hug. "Dad," I exclaimed, truly happy to see him. "I'm so glad you could make it." My father returned the hug, his familiar cologne bringing back memories of my childhood. "I wouldn't miss this for the world, sweetheart." I turned to the second man, reaching out to shake his hand warmly. "Mr. Thompson, it's wonderful to see you again." "The pleasure is all mine, Laura," he replied with a gentle smile. Veronica, who had been momentarily stunned into silence, suddenly found her voice again. She whirled on Mr. Thompson, her face contorted with rage. "Daddy," she shrieked, causing nearby guests to turn and stare. "What are you doing? How can you associate with this upstart? She just got lucky, and now thinks she belongs here with us." Mr. Thompson's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. "Veronica, be quiet this instant," he hissed, his eyes darting around at the growing crowd of onlookers. He gestured towards my father. "This man is Gregory Hamilton, one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the city, and my new business partner. Your foolish outburst could jeopardize a very important deal." But Veronica was beyond reason. "I don't care," she spat. "Daddy, you can't do business with them. I forbid it. Cut all ties with them immediately." The color of Mr. Thompson's face deepened, now a mix of rage and mortification. "How dare you?" he roared, causing the entire room to fall silent. "You spoiled, ungrateful child. I've had enough of your behavior. From this moment on, you're cut off. No more allowance, no more luxury apartment. Nothing." Veronica's face drained of all color. "Daddy, no. You can't mean that." Mr. Thompson turned to my father and me, his voice shaking with suppressed anger. "Mr. Hamilton, Laura, I cannot apologize enough for my daughter's appalling behavior. Please forgive us." Then, fixing Veronica with a steely glare, he said, "Leave. Now. You're no longer welcome at this event." Just then, I spotted Jack making his way through the stunned crowd. He must have heard the commotion and come to investigate. As he reached us, Mr. Thompson extended his hand. "Jack, my boy," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I want you to know that I completely understand why you ended things with Veronica. You've made a much better choice in Laura." Jack, looking slightly bewildered but catching on quickly, shook Mr. Thompson's hand firmly. "Thank you, sir. I couldn't agree more." Veronica, realizing the full impact of what had just transpired, burst into tears. "Daddy, please," she sobbed, mascara running down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. Please don't do this." But Mr. Thompson had already turned away, engaging my father in conversation. "Now, Gregory, about that deal we were discussing." As the two men walked off, deep in conversation, Veronica was left standing alone in the middle of the ballroom, her carefully cultivated image in tatters. The drama with Veronica slowly faded into the background as the award ceremony began. I found myself growing nervous as they started announcing the winners in each category. Jack squeezed my hand reassuringly, and my father gave me an encouraging nod from across the room. And now, for the successful debut category, the announcer's voice rang out. I held my breath. "The winner is Laura Anders." For a moment, I sat there in shock. Then Jack's gentle nudge brought me back to reality. "You did it, honey," he whispered excitedly. "Go on up there." As I made my way to the stage, I could hear the applause. But rising above it all were the enthusiastic cheers from my father and Jack. Their pride was palpable, and it filled me with warmth. In the days that followed, the event was all anyone could talk about. Not just my win, but the spectacular fall from grace of Veronica. Rumors swirled about her whereabouts. Some said she'd fled the city in shame. Others whispered that her father had sent her to live with relatives in another state, hoping to avoid further embarrassment. Whatever the truth, Veronica vanished from our lives as suddenly as she had reappeared. It was as if a dark cloud had finally lifted, allowing the sun to shine through. Jack and I took this opportunity to reassess our social circle. We decided to surround ourselves only with people who valued us for who we were, not for our status or wealth. It was a smaller group, to be sure, but it was genuine. Some of Jack's old friends reached out, apologizing for their past behavior. We forgave some, recognizing that they had been caught up in Veronica's toxic influence. Others, we decided, were better left in the past. One evening, as we sat on our patio watching the sunset, Jack turned to me with a smile. "You know, Laura," he said, "I've been thinking about everything that's happened. And I realized that I'm the luckiest man alive. Not because my wife is a successful businesswoman, though that's certainly impressive. But because you're you. Kind, strong, and true to yourself no matter what." I felt tears prick at my eyes. "I love you, Jack," I said softly. "I love you too," he replied. Here's to us, and to many more years of facing whatever life throws our way, together. As we clinked our glasses, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. The challenges, the tears, the triumphs, they had all shaped us, strengthened us. And while I knew there would be more obstacles ahead, I was ready to face them.